Well, it's just about 11 a.m. on the Eastern Standard Time here in Atlanta, and I would like to welcome everybody who joined us today. A very exciting topic today of interest to many of us in IB scholarship. I'm Professor Tamer Çavuşgil. I'd like to be the first to welcome you to our ongoing webinar series that we started in collaboration with the MSI Consortium, 9 other cybers in the United States, as well as the Academy of International Business Teaching and Education, SIG, as well as Emerald Publishing. So cybers, some of you may be new to cybers, are national resource centers in international business. They're known as Centers for International Business Education and Research. We've started these webinar series last April 20, actually, more than a year ago. And after some 50 webinars or so, we built a huge community of some 3,000 educators who tune in almost on a weekly basis to engage in conversations about teaching, pedagogy, research, as well as join us for conversations with business executives. So today's topic is very interesting. Before I say something about the nature of the topic of the day and also welcome our speakers, let me mention that these sessions are recorded and will be available to you and those in your networks on the Georgia State Cyber website, as well as Georgia State Cyber YouTube channel. You will receive an email after the webinar has been recorded, so you can share that link with your colleagues. When you do exit today at the end of 1 hour, there will be a short survey just with 5 questions. And I encourage all of you to stay on and answer those questions because we're very interested in your opinions about this particular program as well as future programming. During this webinar, everyone except the panelists is muted. And there will be an opportunity for you to post your comments and questions. Use the Q&A button for that. And if you need any assistance, use the chat function. We will leave about 10 minutes at the end of before the end of the hour for some comments and questions. I'll ask our speakers today to respond to those. And they will also share their handouts with you, readings and any PowerPoint presentations that they may have used during the session. So those will be available to you and will be emailed to those who registered today. So let me just turn to our speakers, turn to our topic, which has to deal with, I think, very contemporary issue, the impact of technology, including digital technology, on multinational enterprises, their activities. And I think I say this is very timely because as we move into this virtual connectivity platform, I'm thinking about companies trying to build partnerships across cultures and across geography. To what extent that will be complicated, even though we have the virtual technologies available to us, if people stop traveling and facing each other face to face, sitting down, getting to know each other, how will, for example, partnerships evolve? How will conflict resolution, dispute resolution be resolved? And to what extent we'll be able to transfer knowledge, especially know-how and tacit knowledge, when we don't have that face-to-face connectivity? So these are some of the questions that we may discuss today. I recall a recent survey, McKinsey survey, that was repeated just during this pandemic, asking a large number of executives around the world about their intentions to relocate. If they were given the opportunity to relocate and work in another part of the country, world, would they be willing? And they compare those results with the same survey 5 years earlier. And now we see a sharp decline in the percentage of people, basically employees and multinationals, different countries, who are willing to relocate. That's kind of alarming too. So what does that mean for the future of the multinational enterprise? So issues like this, I think, are very, very contemporary. And we have three very qualified, distinguished colleagues with us today. First, let me welcome Ilya Kuipers. Ilya, you are at Singapore Management University. You're joining us from Singapore. Thank you so much for accommodating our time as well. Ilya completed his PhD at Tilburg University. He focuses on strategic management, governance issues, and performance issues, and alliances and strategic partnerships. My introductions will be very brief. I think some of you may have looked at their bios. They're very extensive and very illustrative. So then we have Professor Yong Lee. Yong, welcome to us from University of Nevada. Yong received his PhD at the University of Illinois, and he focuses his research on strategic entrepreneurship, innovation, internationalization issues. And Yong, I know you've done work on venture capital firms, their role in entrepreneurship, crowdfunding issues, and similar issues. So welcome to you. And we have one of our own. We have Xian Cecilia Gu, who was just promoted to be associate professor at Georgia State University. I say that, Cecilia, now, just now, but actually it's been a while, but it's still fresh in our minds. So Cecilia, of course, has completed her PhD at the National University of Singapore and US. Her research is in the strategy area, cross-section of strategy and international business. Cecilia, like many of us, studies emerging markets and has done work on family firms as well. With that, I welcome all three of you. Cecilia, I will ask you to get going with our conversation, the conversation that you have planned. I will also keep track of the comments and questions that our participants may have submitted, and then we'll interject them into the discussion. So welcome to all three of you.
Thank you so much, Tamir, for the welcoming and the introduction. And thank you everyone for joining us today on this exciting topics. So today I am going to briefly introduce the topic and our distinguished speakers, and then we will move on to Ilya and Yong for their perspective. I will share mine briefly, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. So throughout the session, please feel free to share your questions or your comments in the Q&A box, and we will hopefully have time to get back to that and have a very engaging conversation today. So again, as Tamir mentioned, today's topic is about interfirm relationship and how the modern technology and technological innovation play a role in international interfirm relations. So as we all know, interfirm relations play a very key role in firms' international expansion and operation. There are a lot of study that has been done on how these interfirm relations affects multinational enterprises' knowledge transfer, innovation, and performance outcome. However, we know much less about how this modern technology transforms the collaborations between the companies and consequently affects MNE performance. For example, advancements in infrastructure and technologies such as artificial intelligence, digitalizations can profoundly alter the competitive landscape for both the local and the foreign firms. As Tamir mentioned just now, McKinsey just published a global survey of executives, and it shows that the COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the digitalization of MNE's interactions with their global partners by 3 to 4 years. So, so today's topic really is to offer a discussion on how technology advancement can affect MNE's global partnerships and partnership performance. Is this a curse or is it a blessing? We will focus on the topic, and hopefully by having an engaging discussion today, we will be able to better understand the phenomenon and also identify interesting research questions and theoretical perspective on this emerging topic. So just now, Tamir has a brief introduction of our distinguished speakers today. Just very quickly, we have Elias Kybers today with us. He's associate professor in Singapore Management University. He works in the area of strategic management and international business. He has published papers in top-tier journals like SMJ, Science, GIBS, AMA, etc. He is also associate editor of AMJ and previously served as a guest editor of GIBS as well. We also have Yong-Li here with us today. He is the lead professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So he also is very interested in topics such as crowdfunding, venture capital, international expansion, new venture innovation, etc., and published in various top journals as well, such as AMJ, GIBS, Science, SMJ, etc. So he currently served as the associate editor in Academy editorial board in AMR, JBB, and GIBS, and also is the associate editor of SCJ. So without further ado, let's turn to Elias Kybers for his point of view on this very interesting topic. I will pass on to you, Elias.
Okay. I should have my screen shared now, I think. Okay. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the world. So let me first start by thanking Georgia State University for organizing and inviting me, as well as the individual people that have been working hard behind the scenes to run this webinar. I think I've already been extensively introduced twice, so there's not too much to kind of say or repeat. On the slide here, I have some of my research interests. But I think what's most important for today is I do have a profound interest in external corporate development activities such as alliances, and I'm going to draw from my background doing that kind of research. You'll also see I'll draw a little bit from the theories I often work on, transaction cost economics and so onwards, to make a few points here. If you have any questions after the talk, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to get back to you. And as mentioned, the slides I'll be using will be shared as well. So if you want to get information about any of the citations, that information will be provided to you. Okay. Maybe a little bit of a roadmap of what I'm going to talk about. I was about to say tonight, but it's daytime for you guys. So my goal today is to explore how technological advancements might influence, first of all, the propensity to enter in cross-border collaborations, as for instance, opposed to using other entry modes or governance modes. And second of all, I want to talk or explore how technology might influence each of the key stages in the life cycle of collaborations. I think most collaborations have very distinct phases, and they will focus on issues related to partner search and selection, negotiating the deal, how to structure the deal, post-formation management, and alliance termination. And I'm definitely emphasizing the might here, how technology might impact these. And my aim is more to identify some potentially interesting research gaps and questions rather than to give definite answers. So I'm going more for a broad approach to show potential in this kind of research rather than going into depth and exactly explain how maybe to harvest that potential. I think having a broader understanding, given the state of the literature, maybe is more urgent than going into detail on one particular topic. One more side comment. I apologize, my slides are a little bit packed more than usual. I literally run from the vaccination center to my office. I wasn't sure if I would get an adverse reaction to being vaccinated, So my insurance policy was to have packed slides with as much information as possible in case I would have some side effects. But let me start here. First, I want to talk a little bit about the propensity for firms to enter in alliances as opposed to other entry modes. And I would like to do so from a transaction cost perspective. It's a theory I'm familiar with, but it's also a theory that has been fairly dominant in international business research to look at governance choices and alliances in particular. So I think that makes a good starting point to start exploring how technology might impact the propensity that firms enter into alliances. And I would like to start quickly with some basics behind transaction cost technology and how alliances fit in transaction cost logic. And then in the next step, highlight how technological advancements might play a role. So if you're going back to the founding father of transaction cost economics, Oliver Williamson's initial work, he basically argued firms can opt or draw from two distinct or discrete alternative governance modes to organize their economic transactions. On the one hand, you could organize transactions through market solutions, on the other hand, through hierarchy or hierarchical solutions. In his later work, he fleshed out intermediate modes within these two polar forms, including alliances or hybrids. So what's distinct in a transaction cost perspective kind of view is that alliances are a hybrid and they exhibit features of both markets and hierarchy. And they're typically preferred when nor pure market solutions or pure hierarchical solutions offer an efficient solution. So in other words, neither of the extreme governance solutions are efficient, they're inefficient, and as a result, we opt for an other solution, a hybrid solution. And what I'm going to propose in the next slide is that maybe technological advancements might narrow the range of situations for which pure markets or pure hierarchies do not offer efficient solutions anymore. And the implication of that would be that maybe from a transaction cost perspective, we might go more for the extremes rather than for these kind of hybrid solutions, and that might reduce the use of alliances. Okay. To make that argument, I'm actually drawing from a recent paper I have together with Jean-François Hénard, Brian Silverman, and Gökhan Ertuğ. And in that paper, we propose that advancements in machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, and blockchain technology have the potential to affect the relative cost of different governance mechanisms. Specifically, on the one hand, related to hierarchies, these advancements might reduce bureaucratic costs. It might reduce shirking within your organization. It might reduce the cost of monitoring your employees. And it, as a result, might make hierarchies less costly and a more efficient governance mode or mechanism. On the other hand, we also might see similar kind of tendencies when we talk about technology and markets. Technological advancements might reduce search costs. It might reduce the cost of writing and enforcing pure market contracts. And as a result, markets might become less costly and more efficient as well. So what we have here essentially is that the same technologies might have the potential to make both market transactions and hierarchical transactions more efficient. Okay? We also argue in the paper, while the net effect is unclear, I think it's not unreasonable to expect that situations where pure markets or pure hierarchies are inefficient would become more rare. And if those become more rare, we might have to resort less to hybrid governance modes. Okay? That's one view, and that's one view that might suggest that we might opt, because of these technological advancements, less for alliances for these hybrid kind of modes. Okay? It's always important to provide a balanced view, and I also want to kind of highlight some additional or alternative views that might actually suggest the opposite. First of all, there's some recent work by Yves Doss and Rover who argued that digital revolution is going faster than many firms' ability to respond. And then in their paper, they propose that firms increasingly need alliances, although they argue a different kind of alliance than many traditional alliances. They need them to respond effectively to these technological disruptions. And they cannot respond on their own, so alliances become more critical. So that would be an opposite kind of argument that would suggest that technological advancements might make alliances more prominent, a more likely choice for firms. Okay? Second, in addition to this, there's also some work that suggests that technology might affect a firm's ability to manage large and more diverse alliance portfolios. So this would suggest that firms might be able to handle more alliances at the same time. So basically, these two alternative views suggest that technology or technological trends might make collaborations more widespread. So I think the bottom line here is some work suggests maybe less alliances will occur, other work might suggest the opposite. And to me, that makes an interesting research opportunity. I think there's enough tension here to explore whether and how technological advancements might influence firms likely to enter into collaborations as opposed to using alternative entry modes or governance modes. Next, I want to highlight some ways I think, or maybe expect how technological advancements might influence some of the key alliance life cycle stages, starting with partner search and selection. I think in a superficial way, the goal at this stage is typically for firms to identify complementary partners that can help them achieve their goals and find partners that are not dissimilar in problematic ways. However, one of the key challenges at this stage firms face is that they face considerable information asymmetry, especially searching and selecting partners in a cross-border context. So that's definitely one hurdle they have to overcome when they're searching and selecting their partners. Another important issue is that some research has shown that partner selection assessment has been subject to bias. For instance, homophily might play a role. You're attracted more to similar partners, even if that's not purely rational. And I see potential in how technology can help deal with these two issues or these two challenges. And I think it would be interesting to investigate how and when big data, machine learning, AI might reduce information asymmetry, might help identify suitable, maybe otherwise overlooked partners, or can act as decision support to offset some of the biases that might be at play in these kind of decisions. The next important stage in the alliance life cycle is deal negotiations. Okay, so I would like to focus on how technology might affect the negotiation stage. And I think two, and I'm sure there's more, right? But I think two key challenges here are to develop trust and to deal with cultural differences. And currently, we're seeing a wave of alliances being negotiated in a virtual way. Of course, that's due to COVID travel restrictions, especially in Asia. We still have a lot of travel restrictions. It's, of course, unclear whether this might persist or not, but it does raise interesting questions. Okay? I think it would be interesting to explore whether the virtualization of alliance negotiations will persist and how that will impact negotiations outcomes and the challenges associated with that stage. And I think the positive news is there's already a fair bit of research in related fields that can help us to understand this or inform us how that might play out. For instance, there's micro work that has explored the effects of virtualization and the lack of physical interactions on trust in teams. That can be extended from the interpersonal level to the alliance or the inter-firm level as well. Similarly, there's micro work on cultural differences in virtual teams that also might offer insights how virtualization of alliance negotiations might have an impact on negotiations outcome. So I think there's a sound foundation that can be extended to address some of the questions that are at play at this important stage of the alliance lifecycle. Okay. A next stage or a closely related stage is that you need to structure your collaboration. For instance, you need to agree on and write contract terms. And again, related to this, there's a growing and interesting body of work in law and general management that has started to recognize that machine learning and artificial intelligence combined with the availability of big data on contracts might pave the way for at least partial, maybe full automation of contract drafting, contract review, contract analysis, and enforcement. And this work typically looks at contracting more generally. A lot of that is outside our field, but some of these in the field of management as well. And it would be interesting to see if these technologies can influence contracting specifically in cross-border alliances. I think the cross-border alliance context might be unique, which might trigger some questions along the lines of the following. Alliances are complex. They may be more complex than negotiating and structuring or writing contracts for other types of deals. And I personally have a hard time seeing that everything can be automated, but it would be interesting to see what aspects of alliance contracts can at least be partially automated through artificial intelligence, machine learning, and big data. Okay? Alliances, as we know, also come in many forms and shapes. It would be interesting to see for what types of alliances this can be useful. Maybe it's more useful for vertical alliances, buyer-supplier relationships, for instance, which may be a little bit more narrow in scope, more predictable than, for instance, R&D alliances, which are more open-ended, and it might be harder to use these kind of technologies to draft contracts in these kind of contexts. With respect to the cross-border nature of such deals, it would be also interesting to see how institutional differences, especially differences in legal regimes, matter for these kind of technologies being adopted in alliances as well. Maybe the legal regime, some legal regimes might be more allowing for these kind of technologies to apply than others. Another important aspect of structuring your deal is to choose between different types of alliances. And one important choice is the choice between entering an equity joint venture or entering in a contractual alliance. And kind of going back to the transaction cost logic I started with, equity joint ventures are typically equated with being more hierarchical. Contractual alliances are more equated with having more market features. And as I mentioned earlier, technological trends have the potential to reduce the relative transaction costs associated with both markets and hierarchy. So it might also impact the choice between these different types of alliances. Here, I won't go back into detail since it is essentially the same kind of logic I kind of pointed out earlier, but I think it does highlight again that technological advances might also impact this important choice when you structure your alliances as well. Okay, eventually you form an alliance, you need to manage your collaboration. And I can also see several ways how technology might affect the post-formation management of alliances. To give you a flavor of this, I have 3 points. First of all, big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence might improve firms' ability to monitor the collaborative partners. But it's unclear what the implications are. On the positive side, maybe this does reduce the risk of opportunistic behavior. On the negative side, maybe this hampers the development of trust and value creation. So it's by no means clear that these technologies are going to solely have a positive impact. And I think it's worth to explore both the negative side of these advances and the positive sides. Okay. Second, we're seeing a number of blockchain solutions between firms in their value chain. There's already research that starts looking at that. I think some of these insights could also be applied to look at how resources, how activities are shared between partners within an alliance. Okay. Blockchain technology has a potential to reduce uncertainty in sharing resources. It might offer alliance partners real-time information about their partners or what happens to their resources. So again, on the positive side, this might reduce appropriation risks, maybe the downside potential of collaboration. On the downside, it might also limit resource sharing in other ways, or the value creation potential of alliances might go down because maybe intangible tacit resources are harder to kind of organize for these kind of blockchain technologies. It's also interesting to explore in an international context whether the benefits of these technologies and the security it gives is more valuable in context with weaker institutions. Okay. Third, it might be also interesting to explore whether the virtualization of the multinational affects headquarter alliance relationship. There's an interesting recent review piece by Klaus Meyer that touches upon this, but there's still some questions that might be interesting to explore. For instance, does virtualization allow for easier coordination between the alliance partners and between the alliance and headquarters? Okay. You could explore how it impacts knowledge flows. I think Tamer also touched upon this already, and the control you have as a headquarters over your alliances. In terms of leadership, does virtualization allow multinational top management teams to be more directly involved in the management of alliances, or vice versa? Does it give the opportunity for the top management of an alliance to be more involved in the overarching strategic direction of the firm? So I think here, when it comes to top management teams, leadership, there are interesting questions to explore as well. Okay. Then finally, I think it would be interesting to see how technology affects alliance terminations. Alliances are not designed to last forever. They're often unstable. However, research has shown that termination decisions are often suboptimal and prone to bias. Research has shown they're prone to escalating commitment, overconfidence by managers, all these kind of biases. In decision science and behavioral economics, there's a growing literature that kind of looks at these heuristics, these bias issues, and they explore how artificial intelligence can reduce the effects of bias and noise in decision making. Okay, so it would be interesting to me to see if future research could explore how artificial intelligence related technologies can act as decision support, or how artificial intelligence assisted interventions can help reduce bias when it comes to alliance termination decisions, which are often particularly prone to these kind of biases. Okay, to wrap up, I think, oops, I was so close to finishing. So just to wrap up, most of the points I made are speculative, they're explorative, they're very open-ended, but I think they do indicate to me that relatively little is known. Sorry, did my screen also? Okay, let's keep going anyway. I think relatively little is already known about how recent technological advancements affect alliances. But I think insights from related fields suggest that these technologies can have a substantial impact on every aspect of alliances. And that makes for an interesting and fruitful research area for me. And I think, first of all, to give at least some suggestions, a number of related fields in decision science, micromanagement work, law, information sciences provide us a strong foundation to draw from. So I would really encourage cross-disciplinary work to address these kind of questions. And I think that's something that's valued by a lot of journals like GIPS in our field anyway, that like to see that kind of bridging between different kind of literatures or fields. Okay. Second recommendation I would make is to try to go beyond more or purely phenomenological research. And I think there's opportunity to integrate these technological developments in existing theories. I think I made a case for that when we talked about transaction cost economics. There's an opportunity to infuse that in trust-related theories. And I think that might allow us to refine and extend these theories. And just going beyond the phenomena and coming up with theoretical extensions might allow for a bigger impact that goes well beyond the alliance literature. And then finally, as IB scholars, I think it's important to embrace the unique nature of cross-border alliances, the unique characteristics of the multinational. I think that's going to allow us to come up with additional nuance, identify important boundary conditions to when and how these technologies might have a positive or negative impact. Okay. I would love to hear your thoughts, questions, so please add them to the Q&A box. Thank you very much for your attention, and my apologies for the technological slip up. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ilya. That's a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Let's move on to Yong. Are you ready? And by the way, when Yong is sharing, keep the questions coming and we will be able to address that later on. Thank you.
Can you see the slides?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Cecilia, Tamir, and everybody at Georgia State for this wonderful opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts. And it's good to see some of the old friends. Like Ilya, I haven't seen you for years. And I'm also glad to see a few familiar names, Chris, Elaine, I see there, Marjorie, Leith, G. And so I am going to cover quite a lot of topics without going into detail. And also, I will take a slightly different perspective as compared with what Ilya just discussed. His focus more on the theoretical. I'm going to take a look at some of the important phenomena. And in that process, I will also discuss the theoretical implications. And so, now, if we are going to discuss the implications of technological advancements for multinational enterprises or MNEs, we need to start with a basic understanding of why MNEs want to go international. And so if you look at the motive, it's either to seek resources or to expand the market. The underlying logic is economies of location, scale, agglomeration, networks, learning, etc. As far as the investment strategy is concerned, we talk about the timing, location, scale, mode, the boundary choice, scope, sequence, portfolio decisions, as well as divestment, exit. But for illustration purposes, my talk is going to be focused on the investment or entry aspect. And so if we look at what we are right now, you see some important technological trends, as also mentioned by Ilya. And so we, for example, now we talk about artificial intelligence, augmented reality, big data, blockchain, cloud computing, digitalization, etc. And if we look at the history of our humankind, we see waves of innovation that have contributed significantly to employment, job growth, and economic progress. And so, as you can tell here, 20 years after founding, Amazon is employing almost as many people as Walmart. That's the magic of technological advancements. Now, for this talk, I'm going to focus on two recent technological advancements. One is what I would characterize as physical infrastructure. For example, the high-speed railway, Shinkansen or Hyperloop. The other is information infrastructure or digital infrastructure, as represented by the development of 5G networks. Now, what is the primary role of these, technological advancements? Physical infrastructure primarily increases mobility of human capital and, to a lesser extent, flow of physical goods. Digital infrastructure, on the other hand, primarily increases flow of information in terms of amount, speed, reliability, etc. And so we're going to see the implications of these technological advancements for MNE strategy. Okay, and so as we know, physical infrastructure increases mobility of human capital and flow of goods. And from that, we can expect that, the development of something like high-speed railway will be particularly valuable if knowledge is less evenly distributed. And in other words, you have technology centers, centers of technological excellence distributed in certain regions of the world that are, of course, supported by human capital. If that's the case, then the implication for MNE strategy would be a little different. And so I'm going to use several major dimensions of MNE strategy as an illustrating example. Okay, so as far as entry timing is concerned, for example, the development of high-speed railway will be particularly beneficial if entry barriers are related to mobility of human capital and flow of goods. And so that's because, as Ilya also mentioned, high-speed railway as well as digital infrastructure helps reduce information search, coordination, and collaboration costs. And so in that sense, something like high-speed railway could facilitate foreign entry with the assumption that the foreign, the regions or locations are connected contiguously, because we are talking about physical infrastructure. Okay. As far as partner choice is concerned, Cecilia recently has a nice paper in which basically they argue that geographic distance is going to have a negative impact on the performance of startup VC partnerships, but that negative impact is going to be alleviated by the development of high-speed railway. As far as MNE location strategy is concerned, I actually think this is one area that definitely requires more attention, because we know that, for example, high-speed railway will connect more regions and places, right? But will that development lead to more global concentration or more global dispersion of value chain activities? And so that's an interesting question. I won't go into detail for now, but I just raised the question, and as you can tell, I raise more questions than provide answers. And also, as of now, my talk has focused on geographic distance, development of physical infrastructure. But what about institutional distances, right? And so the literature has just suggested psychic distance, cultural distance, institutional distance, the cage distances, etc. The key thing is here, as Douglas North once put, institutions, especially informal institutions, are impervious to change. So that means that, well, the development of high-speed railway can help reduce geographic distance. But my conjecture is that institutional distances might persist. Okay, and so how do those two things, institutional distances and the geographic distance, would interact to affect MNE strategy? And the other one is information infrastructure, especially digital infrastructure as enabled by computers, mobile devices, broadband networks. They increase the flow of information. And so as a result, we expect that the development of digital infrastructure would be particularly beneficial to MNEs if entry barriers are related to flow of information. Okay, so this is kind of a proposition, if you like. And so you can expect that information-based digital multinational enterprises would particularly benefit from this kind of technological advancement in their foreign entry. As far as MNE scope or portfolio decision is concerned, there are some interesting studies that also suggest some kind of debate, I would say. So information and communication technology adoption, on the one hand, enhances MNE coordinated global production networks. Okay, would increase the global network of MNEs. On the other hand, a recent study suggests that, for example, 3D printing may consolidate the intermediate product manufacturing, but increase localization. And that is, the production would actually be more dispersed and closer to the end users. And so you see this kind of contrasting effects of technological advancement. And finally, just as another illustrating example, when we talk about MNE boundary mode choice, that's the focus of Ilya's talk a moment ago. So are you going to do it in-house at arm's length or through JV or alliance, right? What's the impact of technological advancements? And as with Ilya, I would say a priori or theoretically, technological advancements seem to lower both internal or coordination costs and external collaboration costs. So in that sense, the impact of technological advancements, on the governance mode choice is probably a priori theoretically ambiguous. That means that we need to dig deeper and find the conditions or contingency factors under which each governance mode is selected. And so one recent paper suggested, for example, that the effect of technological advancement on MNE boundary or mode choice also depends on the complexity of the technology itself and the codifiability of the knowledge involved in the production process. Now, as of now, we talked about the impact of physical infrastructure and information infrastructure. But if you look at many parts of the world, both physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure are developing. And so one question is, how does the combination of the two affect MNE strategy, right? I will talk about two aspects in brief to encourage more thinking in this direction. One is related to digitalization. And so here we can talk about digitally enabled products such as robots and smart cars versus digital products such as mobile apps and cloud computing, right? Digitally enabled products do not have the digital thing as the core offering. On the other hand, the digital product has the core offering digitalized, okay? And so from this difference, one could speculate that while both would benefit from the development of digital infrastructure, digital products would probably benefit more from the development of digital infrastructure, and digitally enabled products would probably benefit from the development of both. Okay, and what does that say about MNE strategy? The second one is I also have done some research in this regard. Are we living in a flatter world, or are we living in a more spiky world? Okay, and as far as the physical infrastructure and information infrastructure are concerned, I just would like to conjecture that there might be marginalization of locations in between transport hubs. As I show here, A and C are probably central nodes, and B might just be a stop. Okay, and so would that have some kind of differential implications for different locations? If there is some kind of marginalization of locations in between the central nodes or hubs, are we going to see even higher concentration or agglomeration of MNEs in central cities? Okay, so those are, I think, questions worth further investigating. And so far we've discussed how physical infrastructure and information infrastructure affect MNE strategy, but there is very little research on how MNE strategy would shape the development of physical structure and information structure and the policy support in that regard. Now, our discussion has implicitly taken the perspective of large established firms going international. What about young, independent, small startups going international? Okay, so this is a case where the liability of foreignness meets with the liabilities of newness and smallness. And so I would say one useful perspective is to ask this question: when do physical infrastructure and information infrastructure confer distinct advantages to startups as opposed to large established companies? Again, this is for illustrative purpose. And so when we talk about the types of products and channels, that is how you're going to deliver your product offering to the end users. Products can be bits virtual or physical. Okay, the channels can also be virtual, whether through web, mobile, or cloud, and physical. And so my conjecture here is that for digital products that are going to be delivered digitally, electronically, we might see, some global startups. Why? Because the digital products will be instantly accessible from anywhere in the world at a relatively low cost, given that the channel is also virtual. On the other hand, some products are physical and the channels are also physical, as we are most of the products that we are familiar with are still, I would say, in this category. In this case, geographic distance is more of a constraint, and so the development of the physical infrastructure, such as the high-speed railway, might benefit for entry of startups in these categories. Just conjectures as of now. And so if you want to dig deeper, you might talk about the implications of technological advancements for opportunity recognition, opportunity exploitation, and business model of startups. And before I end my talk, I would like to discuss very briefly two other issues. One, I already alluded to this. Would technological advancement lead to more globalization, regionalization, or localization? And two, what about the challenges of disruptive events such as the COVID and geopolitics, especially in regards to globalization versus regionalization? a company's pursuit of efficiency versus resiliency. Okay. And so to conclude my talk, I would like to pose this question from a big picture point of view. We know that technology advancements have introduced no new paradigm problems. For example, digitalization, automation, remote work, hybrid work. And so do those paradigm problems demand new theoretical thinking? Okay, and how those paradigm problems have implications for the eclectic paradigm as proposed by John Downing with regard to the OLI, ownership, localization, and internalization advantages. How would those paradigm problems affect our thinking about existing theories such as transaction economics, resource-based view, even real options, etc. So that is what I would like to share with everybody. Thank you. And if you have any questions and would like to reach out to me, I have my contact information here.
Thank you so much, Yong and Ilya as well for your insightful and very rich perspective on this important topic. So very quickly, I think our sort of themes are very coherent to each other, where Ilya opens up a very general and broad perspective on the topics, update us about a lot of interesting theoretical perspective, where you'll narrow down to talk about two technological advancements and their implications to MNE strategy. And by the way, thank you so much for mentioning my paper, which leads me to a very quick introduction of what I'm doing on that paper. I think it would be a good sort of summary on from a broad perspective to a more focused and narrow focus of the topic. So in that paper, we are, cannot start. Wow. Okay, Yong, would you mind if you stop sharing?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So very, very quickly, so in that paper, we actually look at whether partnership advantage from geographic proximity can remain robust following technology advancement. So this goes back what you mentioned about physical infrastructure or technological advancement in physical infrastructure. And different from what Ilya and Yong mentioned about alliance formation, post-alliance formation management, or strategy, we talk about performance, partnership performance in this paper. So really quickly, we know that the general IB literature will say that geographic proximity is good for partnership performance. In other ways, when the partners are farther away, performance tend to be worse. So we use the context of China's VC and startup partners as the context here and look at whether this partnership performance change with the introduction of high-speed railway systems. So as you can see here, the startups basically locate pretty much spread out compared to VCs who are relatively more concentrated in the coastal area. And this is just a map where you see over the years how the high-speed railway, in other words, the physical technology advanced over a matter of 10 years. And indeed, it significantly reduced the travel time between partners. So with this setting, which is proximate to an exogenous shock, allow us to sort of observe and capture the before-after effects of the introduction of technological advancement, we actually find that technology, in this case, of physical infrastructure technology, will turn the curse into blessing, such that when the HSR is not introduced, geographic distance have a negative effect on performance, whereas after the HSR is introduced, you will see a significantly different and in fact positive trend. We further just identify what is going on and what type of partnerships can better benefit the technological advancement. And later we find that when the partnerships has more tacit knowledge to share, has more complementary resources, or have more complex governance mechanism, these are the partnerships that suffer more with geographic distance, but benefit more from technological advancement. So for the interest of time, I'm not going to spend time in explaining these effects, but just quickly, I think the study really aligns well with what the two speakers have shared just now. First of all, partnership advantage from physical distance, geographic distance, of geographic proximity actually will fade following technology advancement. In other words, the curse can actually turn into blessing for partnerships which can enjoy more from this the benefits of technological advancement. And also for future study, technology advancement, it could be a solution to firms who suffer from liability foreignness, as Yong mentioned, liability of newness and smallness as well. And I also think about what Ilya has mentioned about virtualization, and it's really interested to see how the virtualization will come in and affect the partnership performance from there. All right, so I will stop sharing, and thank you again for our distinguished guests for a very, very interesting and rich insight on this topic. I see there's some questions coming up just now. Let me just take, maybe we can take one. I see you, some of you have answered that offline, but just in case, Ilya or
yeah, I think
yes.
The last one, thank you again, Cecilia, Yong, and Ilya, very interesting. And asking questions is a good idea. I think that also suggests that there's a lot for us to research down the road. The last question that was put up there, I think, had to deal with small versus large. I mean, I can, and maybe technology focus, non-technology, and so on. But I see, and then thinking about Yong's 2x2 matrix, which I found very interesting, where you distinguish a product between virtual, physical, and channel, web-based versus physical, and then global startups perhaps fitting in that very first category, and taking advantage of, even though they may be a startup, because they're utilizing mobile channel or cloud, etc., they can create an advantage. The smaller firms, I mean, this is a question for all of you. The MNEs on one hand, the smaller firms, more entrepreneurial startups, I mean, that makes it an interesting discussion. And of course, we see a lot of innovative and ingenious ways for small startups also to utilize technology. So a global startup does not necessarily mean they lack technology. I just remember Maria Luisa brought this company to my attention, a company that came up with a better medical imaging technology, whereas the large-scale medical imaging technology products, let's say, produced and marketed by Siemens, may sell for tens of thousands of dollars. Now we're talking about a product that can be used at home by you for less than $3,000 today, and maybe in the next version it will be something that most people will be able to buy and use that for various purposes at home. So maybe Yong, you can respond to that. Where do you see this differential impact of technology for small entrepreneurial firms versus multinationals?
Mm-hmm. I do think that in general, the entry barriers are higher for startups than for large established firms, simply because of resource constraints. And we're talking about foreign entry. Okay, that's the background. And so some of the aspects like institutional distances, liability of foreigners, I think they pose similar kind of challenges to startups and established companies. But startups do have their distinct advantages. And so in general, when we talk about entrepreneurship, we usually refer to those companies that have some novel ideas to start a business on. And so that would be the foundation of their competitive advantage. In other words, if we're talking about the digital world, they could come up with some disruptive technologies or products. And because of the fact that the products are digital, that can also be distributed or delivered electronically, as I mentioned, they would be accessible to anybody, anywhere in the world at a very low cost. That helps level the playing field between startups and established companies. I see that as one opportunity, and obviously we need some kind of empirical research to see whether that is the case. That is, given the disadvantages facing startups and the potential advantages that startups may have, in what kind of industries, in what kind of regions do we see more global startups?
Yeah, there is very interesting. There is a related comment from our colleague Pınar Büyükbalcı. She's I think staying on this topic and mentioning that MNE technology venture collaborations might emerge as a special form of alliance, which I think is worthwhile to take a look at separately. This is the newest thing, right? Newest development. And she's adding this might also pave the way for emerging market new ventures to expand internationally as long as they support digitalization process of MNEs. So a promising research topic might be the increasing importance of technology ventures as strategic partners for MNEs and their implications for emerging country ventures. So this is very, very topical, and we see now many platform companies. Actually, this week, I'm carrying on a conversation with one of the senior executives of a home delivery company that started from Turkey called Getir, and about to enter the US market. They're already in places like Netherlands and Amsterdam, London, Frankfurt, and other places. It's only the second large company that has emerged, multi-billion-dollar company that has emerged from Turkey. So that's kind of interesting, what kind of collaborations that firm will be engaged in with, let's say, local suppliers and so on. Cecilia, I'll leave it to you for some closing comments. And
no, I really enjoy this conversation, and for that question and what you mentioned, Tamer, just quickly for what Yong has mentioned, I think it's important to consider the role of public policy and geopolitical relations as well. This is something that we haven't mentioned, but this is what is hitting the news headlines nowadays. For instance, we hear in May, just passed Paris and Berlin is urging EU to crack down the big techs. And we also see increasing political tensions between US and China. We have seen government policies will maybe continue to drive the decoupling, and at the same time, there's a high level of mutual dependence between these two countries as well. So I think the big techs like Google, Microsoft, and Apple, Facebook are indeed under public scrutiny, and which leads to Yong's comments of the startups do have their own advantage. And I think at this point, how to leverage technology, innovation platforms to create value, not only for the shareholders, but also for the stakeholders, for the customers, for the communities, is an important topic for future research as well.
Very good. I know we can go on for another hour, but we respect the time that our colleagues have put in. We try to keep our webinar discussions to an hour. I want to thank all three of you, Ilya, Yong, and Cecilia, for sharing your insights on this important topic. I want to thank all of the participants. We had some 80 plus participants who joined us from around the world. I'd like everyone to stay perhaps connected for just a minute or so and respond to 5 very short questions. And I'd like to end this session With thanks again for everybody, as well as our wonderful team at Georgia State Cyber. You all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Cyber, for hosting the session. And our distinguished speakers as well, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yo. Thank you, Lilia.